And the next person who's reading is Tennison S. They are the author of Survival Strategies, which was winner of the National Poetry Series UGA Press 2023, and the editor of the anthology on contemporary disability, A Body You Talk To. Their work has appeared or is forthcoming in Swim, Hotel America, Booth, Word Gathering, and New Mobility, among others. They've received residencies or fellowships from VCCA and the Virginia G. Piper Writers Center. They are the managing editor at Sundress Publications and Best of the Net, and have taught creative writing, poetry, and fiction, and/or publishing at Western Washington University, Arizona State University, Perryville Women's Prison, the National University of Singapore, and a host of conferences such as AWP, among others. They reside in Washington State, and welcome very much to SoFloPoJo, Tennessee.
Thanks so much. Jackie, that was amazing. And well, anyway, I want to talk to you later. Thank you so much, everyone who's here. Thank you especially to Judy for the wrangling and the emails back and forth, and to all of South Florida Poetry Journal for hosting. I'm going to read 6 poems for you today, but the thing is, I'm one of those people who uses the subtitles when I watch a movie or something, and so I like to have my poetry up in front of people when I read. So Judy graciously said that I could share my screen and do some slides, so I'm going to do that for you today, if that's okay. Make sure I get the right one. There is that. Let me, how do I minimize this? Okay, let me move that. Here's this and play. It should go. Did it work? Are we good? Okay. Yes. So this is my book, which is incredible. I don't have a copy to hold up in front of you because it doesn't come out until September, but it is up for pre-order. Anyway, I'm going to read you 6 poems today, all from this book. I was born in Yuma, Arizona in the 70s. To a cowboy who served in North Korea and a mother who grew up on a dairy farm. My parents split up because my father was abusive, so my mother took me and fled. And so then I had to split time between her in Southern California and him in Yuma, Arizona. The problem there, of course, was that she was no longer there to run interference, and then eventually he remarried, which didn't do a lot either, and just gave me a couple of new antagonists to deal with. So at a point, I set out to capture this sort of 1970s Old West vibe into which I was born. But some people ask me if I did it to get even, or, you know, to come to some sort of reckoning. And I realized that many of the poems in this book might feel or sound like a reckoning, but they weren't. They weren't for anybody but me. They were mostly to get them out of my body. And I think that a lot of poets can kind of relate to that idea that I need it out of my body. I don't actually care who wants to read it. I just need it out of this and into that, so it's over there. And so that's what I set out to do. I truly despised the way that I was raised and the way that I grew up. So I ended up leaving behind the desert and my parents at 16. So much later, I was unexpectedly returning to Arizona, and it hit me really hard. I got really depressed. I did not cope with it very well. I had spent so long. So then at that point, I was in my 40s, and I had spent decades at that point hating sort of at it. And if anyone asked me where I was from, I would say I was from all over. And I didn't really answer. By that point, I had lived in a multitude of states, and I just kind of shrugged it off, and I had a lot of shame around it. So then all of a sudden I was going back, and I didn't cope with it very well. So the first poem in the book is kind of representing my struggle and me trying to come to terms with that pain and going back to the place that I felt had caused all of that pain for me. And so this poem is called I Was Born for Rainy Days, but I was born for rainy days, but I was born in the Sonoran. And I keep thinking she's missing me. If a desert can miss, it does miss me. It has to, meaning I need it to, because what am I otherwise? If everything I leave or that has left me doesn't miss me, then over here at Invisible O'Clock, I still want to feel comfortable being called a visible woman, being called by a name, being seen. But I don't. I am the thing who can't forget that Arizona has been trying to kill me since I was born into it. But even if it hates me, I still get these urges for the touch of the dirt I left in a huff some 40 odd years ago. And suddenly I'm all, please take me back. And I'm sorry, I won't do it again. You're beautiful, AZ. Like my first husband, but I don't really mean it like my third. Because I'm holding a grudge. Because I never thought it was beautiful in the Sonoran until I'd been away for decades, until I grew up and got away enough to look back at it. Like the way I look at pictures of my 20s and remember how gross I felt, how awkward, all angles and elbows, stick out ribs and buck teeth, how unwanted. But now I realize I was always lovely in the soft skin of youth. And I'm sad for young me, for whom the word woman was a wound infected with the cowboy gaze. When I left, I told the scrub, the sand, and the scorpions, saguaro, and especially the cowboys. I told everyone except the painted ponies, the birds, the jackrabbits, everyone but the red-threaded iron-rich rocks and the women who held my hands whenever they found me lost, which was often. I told all of the rest of it except that which is too precious to let go, that they were unwanted, and I threw hate at them in darts and daggers. I hated at all of it, the sounds and smells, the scratchy way of living I was born into. I waved up an exorcism of my origin, of the destructive, violent invasion of cowboy culture. But I'm going back anyway, because I left something of me in the desert. Because you can't imagine the glory of a jackrabbit on the run at full tilt, fleeing the dusk-fired coyote across a road until you've seen it. And you can't know yourself until you know who you're rooting for. So the thing about Yuma is that it was built at the confluence of the Gila and the Colorado rivers. The other thing is that it was colonized. And in that process, the colonizers did what we do. They built a prison to house some of the most notorious outlaws of the time, uniquely incarcerating both men and women. They built a school into which they placed the native children, and they built a ferry crossing at the narrowest point of the Colorado River. They also, at one point, tried to enforce a $600 property tax on the native people. At least one, at least one of those tribes didn't use or have any access to money. And for the curious, that would be over $23,000 today. So Yuma is called the Gateway City because of this crossing point of the Colorado River. And it's of course where people were trying to go as they went west to go to California to find gold. So other things to know about this poem are that Yuma now houses what's called the Proving Ground, which is one of the largest military installations in the world. And this next poem is called The Confluence. This is the bullseye of the sun. At the narrowest point, a natural crossing point of the Colorado River, where the banks were back then less than 1,000 feet across. Thus, they built a ferry crossing. So people, no, not all people, but some people, we all know which people, could get to and from California. Colonials sat down crisscross and armed at the confluence of the two rivers, the Gila and the Colorado, sure, but also of Fort Yuma and the Cocopah, of smoke and water, of heat and cicada, of Arizona, California, and Mexico, and they violenced a Western colonial town out of the Valley of Smoke where there wasn't empty nothing. It wasn't empty nothing. They built a siphon into the river. Hey, it pays to be upstream. Built a prison, built a school, which is redundant, and the cowboys and politicians held up their greed to the sun, lines over lines. They obscured the footprints that were already there with their jackboots. The Smoke Valley with her smoke and hearth fires, dwelling fires, cooking fires, drying fires, rain call fires of families of the Cocopah, the Coquapa, the Kashan, the Coatsan in their homes. All the colonials told them that they had to pay $600 in property taxes. Rivers Valley ransacked as an afterthought of how to cross the Colorado and get to the Golden California. This is the sunniest place in the world, the fifth driest dot on the marble. Not towel dry or ash dry, air of casket dry, cracked open petrified bone dry, crumbling skin dry, 3 millimeters of rain in a year. Diatomaceous place, dried up ocean, salted valley, can't cry, but it's made of tears. Driest place in all of the states, dry. Have you ever tried to take a bite of cricket flour and silica from a spoon? Now swallow it. An encyclopedia entry for the end of days with the King of Arizona presiding, and there 2 rivers converged and made love to keep the people alive. The Gila and the Colorado, there, right there, grab it. That spot, build a river pass. Let's call it a migrants crossing, a welcome from the people just arrived to those who were already there. Bullshit over bravado. Wave the cowboy hats in the air and say hello. Turn a river into an American dream using a siphon. Turn a river into a ditch, a military fort. It's a gateway, okay? A way to welcome some, but don't forget it's never all, to the proving ground of the river's 2,000 years of inhabitants. The autochthonous made into the unwelcome, the Colorado was the savior of the colonials. It delivered life to the driest land they'd ever stolen. I wish like crazy that I could write amusing poems. Like that I had a way to give people a break from the heaviness of my poetry. So I feel like Jackie maybe needs to teach me a class. The way that I felt about Yuma ate at me in many ways for a really long time, for decades. It affected how I feel about myself, not just about that place. Because if I was born there and I came from there, how much of it did I carry with me? But one of the things that not very many people know is that at the time that I received notification that, well, I already knew I was a finalist for the National Poetry Series. And I was mostly just trying not to think about it. But then I got word that my father, who features prominently in these poems, had died. We hadn't spoken in a very long time. He wasn't a part of my life, and I had long wondered how I was going to handle that. And I admit I was pretty shocked that I actually mourned. But then just a few days after he died, I got word that the manuscript had won the National Poetry Series. And that connection will never cease to be amazing to me because I had spent so many years worried about what would happen when I published it and what he would say, hearing him call me up and saying mean and nasty things. Anyway, recently, an old friend wrote to me. They sent me a Facebook message and they said, "You don't seem as angry as you used to. You seem different." And I think that they're right. I think that a lot of the anger that I had left me when he died. And I also think that a lot of it left when the book left my hands, when the book went to the publisher. So I think ultimately that was the whole goal of this book, was to get it out of my body, even if I didn't understand that at the time. So this poem is called The Dare, because I had to dare myself to go back. I make deals with myself that I won't cry or hurt or burn with sadness when I stand in the eye of the desert again and look down at myself from the dunes, watching my skin burn. The deliberate nature of my choice is to go back. The deliberate nature of my choice to go back is the difference between hate and whole, sand-trapped and dune sledding. This time, I will look carefully on the beauty, yes, of sharp things and dry things and scratchy and hard things. I will see silver tines, puncture vine, telson, stingers, barbs. I'll love the beautiful answering hiss of the scorpions. And the deal is, if I can see this, all of this, as beautiful, then for once, I will see myself that way. One day, when I was about 4 years old, my father had taken me along on a hunting trip when he was dove hunting. And my job was to run out from the little blind where we were and fetch the dead doves, like a dog. And on this particular time, I ran out and I fetched it and I brought it back, but it was alive. It was twitching and moving in my hands. So when I got back to him, and I wasn't allowed to touch it, don't touch or talk to the man with the gun. That's a rule. So I took the blanket off of my doll and I wrapped the dove in the blanket. And I sat there cuddling and holding and cooing at it, trying to will it back to life, trying to heal it, wish it into wellness. Anyway, this poem is called Like a Dead Dove's a Doll, and it's the story of the harvest party that they would throw every year when the alfalfa would come in on the ranch. The sun falls down the mesa stairs, chasing after its horizon, fleeing the heat of the day. Hollers from the working hands bring the blue healers to work at dawn, so better get going on the night. We don't waste the dark around here. Dusk draws wives toward the stove. A late 60s bouncing dip brown F-250 races down the drive, coming in from the field with a spray of kicked up dust. Scattering gravel and cowboys into the little home's yard. Rowdies spill from the truck bed, toss a hog into the pit, 2 hands at each end, swinging dead pig like it's a child's game. 1, 2, swing out and back. When the day ends and dinner to feed 40, when the picking's done and the alfalfa comes in, mesquite smoke and steam rise up from red coals lined with wet burlap and the waft of burning hair. The singe of hog skin makes the beer taste better. The night rolls in thick. Spikes frigid goosebumps on drying salted skin, leaves damp chills on the neck. Raising shivers after a day's sweat. Sweat here gathers on the skin just for standing, amming, being, staying put, never mind working. It's 1:12 at 4, but by 9, when they dig up the hog, it takes whiskey to keep warm. I hear the hands talking. They say, I didn't earn my sweat. She don't work much, is pretty useless all around. Well, mostly. She's okay for looking at. Tell her to do something, though, and she's as likely to spend the task daydreaming as doing it. My father joins in to help elaborate. Tell her to run out and go fetch a downed dove from the field while you reload. The next thing you know, she's wrapping that twitchy dying bird in that damned blue dolly blanket like a dead dove's a doll. Slaughter a rabbit for dinner, a rabbit you raised, mind, a rabbit you spend good money bringing up for that very purpose, and she'll cry all damn night like you didn't try to feed her. No matter what, she'll spend half a week refusing to eat. Like most girls, she's not worth much. My father spits into the dirt on his way to the cooler. She's okay for looking at, says another, and winks at me, but she's lazy as a Cadillac's bumper. I have 2 more poems. I don't know how I am on time. Okay. So the Sonoran into which I was born is a tough place to get by. If you've been there, then you know it's not soft moss on bare feet. The animals there, even the human animals, evolve new ways to survive. And I frequently call this book a love story wrapped in a reckoning, because in this experience, I learned to love the animals and their strategies and the things that they were doing to keep themselves alive in a harsh environment. And in the process of doing research, I began to fall in love with the desert. So this poem is Survival Strategies 1. There are 2 survival strategies poems in the book. I'm going to read one for you today. When the rains don't come, and they won't, because Yuma is the sunniest place on earth, which sounds great in the abstract, like a sunburned Anaheim theme park, but ocotillos shed their leaves to preserve energy. Spadefoot toads estivate so they don't die. That is, they sleep for 9 months of the year. Little girls who like animals more than people narrate the silica, carved stories on their skin with cactus tines, but also shade beetles with cupped hands while they cross roadways and fall in love with rabbits to stay alive. Kangaroo rats never need drink a drop. They receive all they will ever need from eating leaves. To conserve energy, roadrunners run in lieu of flight. Bobcats hunt dust devils for practice to keep sharp when food is scarce. River toads have a patch on their bellies which will rehydrate them as they sit in or on tiny gatherings of moisture. Because Yuma receives just 85 millimeters of rain per year, less than 3 paper clips long. Little girls talk to Choya. Are you lonely because no one loves you? Ask Kestrel, will you fly me to my mama? And cry an ocean from missing one. Eventually, through this project and through exploring the desert of my birth with new adult eyes, I came to love the Sonoran. And it's actually my hope that my readers will too. It's not my hope to make people dislike the desert. There's a lot to love about the place where I was born, just 45 years and a couple of miles from where the incredible Cesar Chavez was also born. And these days, when I'm asked where I'm from, I say openly that I was brought home to a pecan grove in the actual sunniest place on earth. The last poem I'm going to read for you is Under the Only Tree for Miles. And it's a prose poem. When I finally got out, I scalded the desert, raised it in my mind, refused it from my life, barred my feet of it. In my heart, I burned it to the sand, then burned the sand to make glass. I turned on it, the whole of the desert and everything, everyone in it, no exceptions. I was running away at 180 knots and headed west and north and out to sea to get away from the desert, but I wasn't always. And I didn't forever. When I returned as an adult, crying, still, and growing dry inside, I plowed my shame into the sand and laid the blame at the feet of the scorpions, the prickly pear, the mesquite. Dryness longs for the desert and retreats there to mourn the ocean. Sand is strewn over centuries carried by feet worn into hooves. The sand, once an ocean floor, calls the dryness to itself while stretching out for the ocean's hand. My feet land on saltillo tiles, the kind I would roller skate across with a rhythmic bump, bump, bump. Red floors, red roads, red clay on the roof. By the river blue sky on broken blue tile courtyards with fountains in front of adobe houses of river clay coupling river to home. The niceties of the modern desert life, married to the AC and divorced from the desert, gloss the pentimento of the Sonoran's antagonism. Where went the desert of my youth? The scrub and prickers, the sweat and rattlesnakes, I am on my knees with remember. This is where I learn who I am. Maybe this is where I learn who she was. The kestrel calls out in echoing cries, killy, 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 but I ignore them. The coyote's chitter in the den is gone, bitch to kit, I don't care. I wished the Sonoran silent under the only tree for miles, miles that run the lines of river, border, state, and country, switchback of sand. I sit and burn it all. Cattle skulls top the posts, shot through with rusted barbed wire, the color of ancient leather, the scent of 1978. I dig for traces of my mother and cry. Scratch out holes looking for the sorcery of a woman who thought Mesa Verde the most beautiful place on earth because the cowboy was nice when they lived there. Heat blossoms as the red of the thermometer inches toward the porch roof. Drinking detail, I'm set on slow, sipping whiskey, spending moments one at a time. A miser. The pecan pie from the diner tastes like it came wrapped in a box. Thirst hangs off me where water tastes nimble but evaporates before I can be quenched. The day has scaly, raking claws, thrusts me, agitated with tusks for minute hands, scrapes me hot and bleeding. I cry. Sun ribbons paint my thighs under the only tree for miles. The cowboy dies somewhere in a home with not one person left truly loving him. It's not justice. It just is. I come from women. I sit in the desert and scrape it away, set up an hour in the night that leaves me hungry for 360-degree eyes. I sit bare woe under stars thick as driveway gravel and howl. I howl and cry, killy, 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 killy. I howl, and that night, nesting as I am in the Sonoran, I realize it was never the desert that I hated, nor the desert that hated me.